because I don't think I remember a busier news week than what we had last week.
And SCOTUS closed out the calendar, so
yeah, yeah, they made sure they got it all in. So, we've got a really, I think, great show, great topics today. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things that happened last week, including the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage, and we're going to talk about California's bill concerning childhood vaccinations and how that is going to influence laws throughout the country and what kind of feedback we're going to get from that. We're going to talk about the Confederate flag and how that that sort of thing is taking hold throughout the country. So we're going to talk about that. And we have a really, really good question that Bob and I are going to discuss. And we're going to have a special guest with us today. Normally, we don't have guests on the Monday show, but I think this one is well worth it. And for those of you who are fans of the show or who have followed along in the past, you'll remember that last year we had an interview with Mark Henkel. And Mark Henkel is the National Polygamy Advocate, and he's from nationalpolygamyadvocate.com. And we had him on. We did an hour interview with Mark, and he talks all about his position, what polygamy is, what it's not. He really went through and sort of addressed a lot of those myths out there that people have concerning it, and I think presented an excellent case. He did a great job of explaining his position. He's a super knowledgeable guy, really, I think, a top-notch speaker. So we're excited to have him on because Bob and I are going to pose a question that I think has a tremendous amount of merit. And in conversations that I had over the weekend with people, nobody's thought of this. So I think this is kind of a unique thing that we're going to discuss with Mark, and we're excited to have him on. So he's going to be calling in approximately 10 minutes or so, and we're going to get through that question with him. So I don't want you to miss that. That's going to do it for introducing what we're doing this week. I just want to touch on today's sponsor. Today's show is sponsored by Audible. And Audible, as you know every week, that they sponsor a show, who they are, what they do, world's leading provider of audio content, audiobooks on the internet. I use them all the time because I don't have time to read books. So check them out. If you go to audibletrial.com/UTLRadio, you're going to get a free audiobook with your trial membership. So check that out. Take advantage of the free audiobook. Also, one more thing I want to mention, UTLRadio.com was updated last week. Significant major update, a rebuild of the website, completely different than what it was a week before. And it's got a ton of valuable information, upcoming guests. Check it out because, it's completely revamped. So UTLRadio.com, check that out. That's going to do it for my housekeeping. I'm going to toss it over to you, Bob.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, obviously the biggest story that's come out of the week. Obamacare was one of them, but the biggest story that affects the psyche and the morale and the ethics and the beliefs and everything that is thrown into the pot that is America is the fact that the Supreme Court struck down state bans against same-sex marriages this past week. Overturning state bans against same-sex marriage, the Supreme Court found 5-4 Friday that marrying is a civil right for all people, regardless of gender. The limitation of marriage to opposite-sex couples may long have seemed natural and just, but its inconsistency with the central meaning of the fundamental right to marry is now manifest. That comes from the majority opinion penned by Justice Anthony Kennedy. He also states that with that knowledge must come the recognition that laws excluding same-sex couples from the marriage right impose stigma and injury of the kind prohibited by our basic charter. The opinion concludes with the finding that there is no lawful basis for a state to refuse to recognize a lawful same-sex marriage performed in another state on the ground of its same-sex character. Now, and you, of course, know there are many states that do have bans on same-sex marriage. Michigan's one of them, which is where I reside. Chief Justice John Roberts led the dissent on Friday for the conservative faction of the court, but a separate dissent by Justice Antonin Scalia is particularly acidic. The majority opinion is couched in a style that is as pretentious as its content is egotistic, Scalia wrote,
Whoa.
adding that it's the opinions that have been coming out of the court, Peter. I hate reading legalese more than anybody, and probably you don't appreciate it either. But they have been great. Adding it that it's showy profundities are often profoundly incoherent. The much anticipated decision comes 2 years after the court broke gay rights ground and striking down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Now, in the earlier case, which Kennedy wrote for a high court majority as well, DOMA kept a New York widow named Edith Shalin Windsor from qualifying for the estate tax exemption on the spousal inheritance from her then wife, Thea Spire, dying in 2009. Though New York legalized same-sex marriage in 2011, DOMA's definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman denied their union federal recognition, therefore no tax exemption. Now, a few other states still had bans against gay marriages on the books at the time, but the Supreme Court did not address then whether marriage equality for all is protected by the Constitution, or whether the defense of marriage should be left to the states, which it struck down the unconstitutional element in DOMA that particular unconstitutional element of DOMA in 2013. Many courts have since used Windsor as precedent for overturning state bans against same-sex marriage, and the Supreme Court agreed earlier this year to decide whether these states violate the equal protection rights of same-sex couples. The 14th Amendment, I think, is the Equal Protection Clause. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you for me scoring that point. The Sixth Circuit, which hears appeals from federal courts in Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee, created a circuit split in upholding state laws banning same-sex marriage. Some said okay, some said not. Now, at Supreme Court oral arguments for the case in April, Kennedy echoed his points about dignity from Windsor. Kennedy revised his theme on Friday's opinion. The lifelong union of a man and a woman always has promised nobility and dignity for all persons without regard to their station in life. Kennedy writing for the dissent. But marriage has historically always been a bond between a man and a woman. Kennedy said that marriage should not stand in isolation from developments in society. History and tradition guide and discipline this inquiry, but do not set its outer boundaries, Kennedy said. That method respects our history and learns from it without it allowing the past alone to rule the present. Now, each of the court's conservative justices wrote separate dissents. Roberts, whose opinion was joined by Justices Clarence Thomas and Scalia, said that the majority's position had undeniable appeal and that the court is not a legislature, which seems to be the overriding theme of a lot of dissent opinions lately this week. Although the policy arguments for extending marriage to same-sex couples may be compelling, the legal arguments for requiring such an extension are not. The fundamental right to marry does not include a right to make a state change its definition of marriage. The Constitution does not define marriage, according to the dissent, and the people of each state should have the power to determine whom to recognize within the bonds of marriage. So you can see where the Supreme Court is very, or at least the dissension is more, and not so much about what has happened, but how it happened.
Right.
And so they're saying, hey, this is a states' rights issue. We shouldn't be involved in this. But obviously, the majority opinion, which shot down the state bans, is saying, hey, you know what? This is something that goes back to why we are who we are. This is in our Constitution. We can't deny people. Honestly, it boils back to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, I guess, if you look at it. Today, however, the court takes the extraordinary step of ordering every state to license and recognize same-sex marriage, Roberts wrote. Many people will rejoice at this decision, and I begrudge none of their celebration. But for those who believe in a government of laws, not of men, the majority's approach is deeply disheartening. 5 lawyers have closed the debate and enacted their own vision of marriage as a matter of constitutional law. Stealing this issue from the people will, for many, cast a cloud over same-sex marriage, making a dramatic social change that much more difficult to accept. Thomas joined the far more angry opinion by Scalia. The substance of today's decree is not of immense personal acceptance to me, Scalia said, wishing that the law may recognize and grant benefits to whatever relationships it wishes. It is of overwhelming importance, however, who it is that rules me. Today's decree says that my ruler and the ruler of 320 million Americans coast to coast is the majority of the 9 lawyers in the Supreme Court. The opinion in these cases is the furthest extent, in fact, and the furthest extension one can even imagine of the court's claimed power to create liberties that the Constitution and its amendments neglect to mention. This practice of constitutional revision is by an unelected committee of 9, always accompanied, as it is today, by extravagant praise of liberty, robs the people of the most important liberty they asserted in the Declaration of Independence and won in the Revolution of 1776, the freedom to govern themselves. Justice Samuel Alito wrote that the majority's opinion will be used to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy. I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes, but if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and in schools, Alito added. There you go. I mean, That is really what this is about. I mean, very strong opinions coming out of the Supreme Court, and it has wide-reaching effects.
Yeah.
To not just, you think back to. Here's a good question, and I haven't looked the answer to this up. Who created marriage, and why? And who created marriage? The answer is religion.
Yeah.
How
Absolutely.
did government get involved?
That's
How and when did government get involved?
That's a good point. And I want to talk for a second about something, because we've seen all this in the news, and we've seen the headlines and the people rejoicing, and I think that the end result that most people see is, oh, great, a victory for same-sex people, and it absolutely is, and not to take away from that, but I'm going to pose a question to you, Bob, and in order to answer this question that I'm going to pose, we are, as I mentioned at the top of the show, very excited to have with us as a guest today. Those of you, again, who are fans of the show, you remember my interview with him last year. It's Mark Henkel. He is the National Polygamy Advocate from nationalpolygamyadvocate.com. And we're going to bring him on in a second to address this point that I want to make that I don't think many people have focused on. So, Bob, here's my question to you. So now government has said that marriage is a civil right for all people. And they have, the point you were just making is, where did marriage come from? It came from religion. Now it's been controlled and adopted by government. Now government is setting rules. Government is saying that same-sex couples have a civil right to marry. What does that mean for people who want to live a polygamous or a plural marriage lifestyle? Doesn't this seem unfair to say, from a government standpoint, you can't have more than one spouse, more than one wife, more than one husband? You're not allowed to do that, but we're going to step in here and say that you can marry somebody, you can marry somebody else, but when it comes to plural marriages, that's not permissible. What do you think about that, Bob?
I don't see how the government can control anything at this point. What they have extensively done is said, we no longer, I don't want to say care. And again, I don't personally care what you want to do. I have my own beliefs, why I have my beliefs, and that's for me. But I don't care what you do. But the government has also now said, we don't care what you do, as long as you are happy. And that's fine, but you can't discriminate against anyone anymore.
Right.
In this arena. No one. If I want to marry a dog, I get to marry a dog.
Yeah. I don't think it's fair. And
I hate to draw it to that conclusion, because that puts in light, I mean, polygamy is not good or bad as far as I don't care what you want to do, but you now get to do it. And I cannot say anything against it if I'm the government.
Well, it's completely unfair. And Mark, I want to welcome you to the show, and thank you again for being on today. I was short notice and you were able to come on, and I really appreciate it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mark, you've heard some of this discussion we're talking about, and Bob and I are discussing the fact that if the government is going to say that certain people can marry, and they're going to say we don't really have control over it because it's your civil right, how is it fair for the government to say polygamy is illegal? It doesn't, those two things don't connect for me. And yesterday I was meeting with a bunch of lawyer friends of mine, and they all, when I proposed this idea to them, they were kind of shocked, and they said, wow, we never thought about it. But yeah, shouldn't polygamists have the right to plural marriages? It doesn't make sense now for the government to say this is a civil right, but that's not. What is your take on that?
I believe the Alberta v. Hodges case was half right and half wrong, in that it is appropriate for the Supreme Court to protect individual rights from government overreach. But neither the federal government in the Congress or through the judiciary have the authority to specifically define what individuals do. For example, in this particular decision, what Justice Kennedy said was that this is protecting, the redefined marriage as a two-person union. Now, one could say, and actually it really is, the arbitrary determinant of two-person union is no different than the arbitrary determinant that was before of gender.
Right.
So ultimately, what they've done is the Supreme Court should have, and this is what I was expecting, they were half right in protecting the fundamental liberty right of individuals, of unrelated consenting adults, to choose their own marriage. One wins. But then they went too far and actually created a specific definition of marriage, and that's where that's legislated from the bench. So it was half right and half wrong. Ultimately, it is correct that you're asking in your question that how can you say government can create this new arbitrary determinant of no longer defined by gender, but now defined as two-person union? How can you do that and thereby prevent unrelated consenting adults choosing polygamy? And the point is, it's that specific arbitrary determinant of two-person union that is where the problem is in this particular decision, and why it still doesn't allow for polygamy, although it'll easily be toppled, because that's the last obstacle to freedom for unrelated consenting adults to be able to choose polygamy. It recognized individuals do have the fundamental liberty right to choose their own marriages. Now we just have to get that arbitrary determinant out of it.
Now,
hi, Mark. It's Bob here.
Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Peter. I'll say, Mark, what do you think? Is it going to be as simple as bringing a case to the Supreme Court, or are there going to be hurdles that have to be stepped across to make this happen?
Well, there is currently a case already that will be going into the 10th Circuit in Colorado, Denver, this year. Brown v. Buman, which is the Brown family from the reality show Sister Wives. And that's actually already gone through, and it's going to be in district. It's being appealed this year. So we'll probably see this go to the Supreme Court in 2017. And what that case is, Brown v. Buman, and Buman is B-U-H-M-A-N, Brown v. Buman, that case essentially decriminalized de facto polygamy as opposed to de jure polygamy, meaning it removed the cohabitation clause of the bigamy statute that said that you could still be defined as a polygamist just merely for cohabiting as a married man with another woman. They struck that out of the law and then redefined the purported prong. So when you say you purport to be a polygamist, it now can only apply to those who purport to be legally married with more than one marriage license. So what that did is it removed the state's power to go in and say, okay, here's a family with a man married legally to one wife and having other women in the house, and we're just going to accuse him of the crime of bigamy and prosecute him. Now they can't do that. They can only go after him if he has more than one marriage license. In the face of this weekend's decision with Alberta v. Hodges, when this case gets up to the Supreme Court, the issue of the arbitrary determinant really is going to be very strong applied to that case, and could very well be the case that overturns the tyrannical case of 1878 of Reynolds v. United States.
I think it's fascinating to see how laws against polygamy were put in place in the first place, because if you tear this apart and you look at what gay rights activists have been fighting for all these years and the things that they've said and the arguments that they've made, a lot of these arguments can apply to polygamy. And what I don't understand is the need for a law. If you want to marry a same-sex person, you're allowed to do that. And whether that was thought of as proper, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, doesn't make a difference because times are changing, people are changing. And here you've got the government changing because they should not tell people what you can and can't do in your personal private lives. Yet they're going to take polygamy and criminalize it and take away people's rights. And it's so fascinating because, Mark, if you are not married, or you are married with one marriage license, I should say, you could live in a house with 40 women and they don't care. It's this designation of the marriage license and what you then purport to be, whether you're married to multiple people or whether you're just cohabitating. What is the whole reason for this sort of nonsensical, at this point, arbitrary ruling or conclusion that you can't have more than one marriage license? Why?
I have created the political term called marriage control, because really that's what we're talking about. The right calls it marriage protection. The left calls it, their view, marriage equality. But the truth is, neither is either. It's really what it's about is using big government for marriage control. For the right to call marriage control marriage protection is as silly as calling gun control gun protection. And for the left to call it marriage equality is really an Orwellian Animal Farm kind of equality where some people are less equal than others, such as polygamists are less equal than homosexuals,
right?
Choosing same-sex marriage. And so really what it is, it's marriage control. It's about using big government to license, define, and control the relationships that people have. The question was asked earlier, where did this come from? Indeed, marriage is a religious creation, and it did not come from the government. Initially, what it ended up being was nothing more than a repository of the public records of the contractual arrangements that consenting adults make, so that you simply went down and said, okay, we have a public record of when we got married. Then suddenly it transformed from being about a record of notice, like a public record, to suddenly being something the government then high-hosied and started taking control and started creating this. Let's be clear, anti-polygamy laws were never about egalitarianism, this idea that we want to protect women. Because if they really cared about women in the anti-polygamy laws, why did it take decades and decades before they ever even let women have the right to vote? The truth is women couldn't vote till 1920. And so the anti-bigamy law, the Morrill anti-bigamy law was in 1862, and the Reynolds v. United States case was in 1878. These are decades before they let women have the vote. This was not about the anti-polygamy laws of the 1800s. Was not about egalitarianism in any way, shape, or form. And the truth is, today's woman is smart and educated, and she's not gonna. No smart woman today is gonna put up with an idiot. So the idea that we need anti-polygamy laws to protect women basically is an insult to women, saying that women are too stupid to protect themselves. The reality is women are way too smart to put up with an idiot. So any guy who's actually going to be a polygamist has to really be a caring, giving guy, or those women are going to gang up on him or leave.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. Go ahead,
Peter.
No, you go first, Bob.
I'm looking back, and there's absolutely, in my mind at this point, you're absolutely correct when you say that marriage as a government institution is a lot about control. It's not 100%. You're absolutely right. And you look back at why it became about control and a lot of the paperwork that was involved. They're trying to figure out property rights, yada yada yada. What do you think this ruling now is going to also undo a lot of that, or is it so ingrained now in law that they could say, hey, you know what, there's no changing this? That's what I'm really concerned about. Is now it's no longer about what it is supposed to be. It's about what is believed. And does that change everything? Does that get rid of a lot of that, you think?
Well, I think that certainly the adamant opposition to same-sex marriage is going to be responding to this decision ballistically.
Yeah.
And I've actually presented what we call the polygamy rights win-win solution to end the marriage debate once and for all, in a way that the right gets limited government, the left gets equality for all, nobody gets to redefine marriage, and nobody gets to impose their definitions on anybody else, including through discrimination laws. And that is, the solution is win-win. Abolish all marriage control for unrelated consenting adults. Then government isn't involved, because constitutionally, the word marriage is not in the Constitution, which thereby prohibits the federal government from being involved in marriage or defining any specifics. The truth is, marriage is an individual right of the individual. Marriage existed before the invention of government. Marriage will exist when government collapses, or if it does. Marriage is a right of the individual, and so ultimately, I believe that as the right faces the loss in this case, they're going to come home to the true conservative answer of limited government that I've been proposing for 20 years, is abolish all government marriage control, so that way the right can save face from this, and we can finally end this marriage control war once and for all.
And I like that you said adults, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear on things that people don't understand, where they think, oh man, they can marry dogs, they can marry kids, they can marry horses, they can marry whatever. That you said adults, because it makes sense in what you said. A lot.
Well, actually, we use three initials to describe the factions. OMOW, OMOWs, is one man, one woman. FSM is obviously same-sex marriage, and UCAP, UCAPs, refer to polygamists. UCAP stands for unrelated, consenting, adult polygamists. We're talking about UCAPs, unrelated, consenting adults.
Right.
So you've got no problem with children, no problem with animals, no problem with incest. It's all self. UCAPs.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Exactly.
I don't understand how anyone at this point could take this argument against polygamy and make it make sense.
No.
I don't see it. And you know what? It's not necessarily that I am want to be a polygamist. It's that I want to be fair. I can't stand inequality and injustice. And how can you say that it's good for one group of people, but not for somebody else? So you're saying to same-sex couples, we believe that you have the ability to determine that you are in love with someone of the same sex and want to get married. We're going to give you that because we believe that you're, consenting, you're competent, you understand what's going on. How is that different? How can you then say to a polygamist, wait a minute, you can't do this because you don't understand what you're doing? And the whole idea that, Mark, you said about protecting women, I think is completely out the window, because today's modern woman would put you in your place faster than you could blink your eye. So, and the other thing that I want to raise is, because you're going to have opponents to this saying, and forget about those people that are looking to criticize Christians and Christian groups and all sorts of things, because that's a very easy target to take, something related to Christian. Last time we were on, we talked about, Mark, the difference between some of these Mormon groups and their ideals versus just the idea of consenting adults. But for those people out there that are going to say, wait a minute, you can't have more than one woman, because how would that affect insurance proceeds? How would that affect health insurance? I don't know what your take is on it, and I'm sure you have a position, but my feeling as an attorney would be, hey, look, that's a contractual obligation that you can deal with the consenting adults with whom you are going to be married. And if there is an issue with insurance, and perhaps your first wife has certain proceeds, maybe your second wife understands that, look, we can't get insurance benefits, but it can be worked out, can't it?
Yes, absolutely. The reality is that there is no difference between partnership law, one-on-one, and corporate law. It's just merely going from a two-person partnership to a multi-person partnership. So, all the contractual obligations can be defined by the individuals themselves.
Absolutely.
And honestly, well, you take a look at it, Peter, and I would think that based on the decision of the Supreme Court and any other ensuing decisions that relate to polygamy, there is no insurance company that should be in business that would not offer benefits to UCAPs, because that would be discriminatory.
Yeah. discriminatory, and they'd be losing money, because think about the premiums that they could generate from a specialty program.
Yeah, worse yet. Bad business now. I mean, and the funny thing is, Mark, I don't know how much you caught before you got on the air. I love to play devil's advocate. I love it. I eat it up. And I'm either too stupid to figure it out this time, or there's not an argument against it.
Really, there isn't an argument against it. This is why I've been proposing this as a conservative to conservatives, that my fellow Christians, that I would say you would be horrified to have a big government gospel control, or big government baptism control, or big government Lord's table control, in which government license decides controls who's allowed to do that. Well, God forbid, why would you want big government marriage control? True limited government and true biblical belief would never want government involved in the religious belief of marriage. You just wouldn't want it. So really, true freedom is not using government to control it. True freedom is having government out of it altogether.
Mark,
that's true.
Mark, what do you think the political reasoning is in modern day politics? Because I'm a big believer that government does not do anything that does not serve the government, as opposed to serving the people. And so what do you think the underlying political reason right now is to define in this law with respect to same-sex marriage that it's marriage between two people? Why do you think they did that, and what is driving this this dislike for polygamy? What is going on?
I can't speak to the actual mind of Justice Kennedy in his writing the opinion, the majority opinion on that. I'm very confident that UTAPs, under continuing polygamists, will one day have our freedom. I am very confident that that's coming. And it could be through two means. Either what this was an intentional stepping stone to give us only one more obstacle to overcome, because essentially the only thing that prevents polygamists from our rights from the Obergefell decision is the phrase two-person union as the definer.
Right.
That's the only thing. So it's almost like it's given us a little bit of a softball, that's the last ball we got to hit, the last pitch we got to hit. But that may or may not be the case, because maybe there was more internalized religious bigotry within the court justices' mentalities and beliefs. I also believe that if we have to go political, even outside of courts, I really do believe that the right that is going to be absolutely ballistic over this decision is going to have to do some soul searching. And as they do that soul searching, I believe they will do what I've been saying for 10 years, come home to true conservatism, true limited government, true constitutionalism, abolish all government marriage control upon the lady concerning adults, and that actually stops same-sex marriage because as a legal function. Because the truth is, OMALs are the ones who caused same-sex marriage. Here's how. By having government redefine marriage to exclude polygamy, they taught the same-sex marriage folks how to later come back and use government to redefine marriage to include same-sex marriage. The truth is, when you use big government, you get big government. And so that's what they did. This is their fault. So they're going to have to rethink, okay, this is the Supreme Court decision now. What can we do? We can either just continue to fight and going nowhere because now the Supreme Court has done this, or we can refresh, reboot, reestablish our values as limited government, and let's do that. And that's actually the solution I've given them. And I think that will be what the right will eventually do. And I'll say thank you. And America can thank polygamists for ending the marriage war once and for all.
Mark, you know what? I want to ask you this question. Mark, I think that behind this same-sex marriage movement that was ultimately raised up to the level of the Supreme Court of the United States, there are a lot of people who were not homosexual, okay? They were not gay, not lesbian. They were heterosexual people who helped promote, support, and ultimately pass this same-sex marriage ruling. It was not just a group of same-sex people saying we want rights. It was the entire country as a whole, with obviously exceptions of certain areas of the country, but it was all of the people coming together and saying, we support, the LGBT community because what you're saying and doing to them about them is unfair. And we're not LGBT, but we think what you're doing is unfair. Do you think that you can get that same support for polygamists from the LGBT community, who has already now been through this, with the support of heterosexual community? Do you think you can get that sort of support?
Well, I have definitely agreed that and said that the only way we're going to get our freedom is getting people that not necessarily want to be polygamists, recognizing we have the right to be that if we choose. Because once you allow government to infringe somebody's rights, then your rights could be infringed next.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. I have seen already that some on the left are already starting to move toward that recognition that polygamy should be, as I've been saying now for the last dozen years, polygamy rights is the next civil rights battle. We're next, and we're definitely coming next. And I have actually already been seeing news articles touching on the fact that polygamy now should be next. The left says, where should we go now, as it were? I have long said, and this is what I've been doing for 20 years, the reason why I have pursued the conservative side by offering the win-win solution of limited government is because I know and believe that the left is easy. Because if you believe in the tolerance dogma, then the tolerance dogma automatically obligates you to embrace unrelated consenting adults choosing their relationships. I don't have to fight hard to persuade you. That dogma automatically requires that. So the left really is an easy sell. It's an easy persuasion. Now that we're past that, and they don't have to worry about thinking that the polygamy boogeyman is going to prevent them from getting their rights, because, well, now they've got them, they don't have to worry about it. They're not going to lose it. So now that they've moved past that hurdle, now they may feel safer to address the polygamy boogeyman, quote unquote, and address that as what unrelated consenting adults really are about, and be able to move and touch us. Unfortunately, what the left tends to do is they tend to focus on what they call polyamory as opposed to polygamy. Polygamy being multiple marriage, polyamory being just multiple loves, which is a lot less committed.
Right.
Well, and you look at when you start looking at the right and trying to topple those people, or I should say win them over, I shouldn't say topple, that seems fairly adversarial, is you have to recognize that they don't sometimes understand the difference between the word freedom and the word right. You have the freedom to believe whatever you want to believe, but you don't have the right to impose it on others.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's what I said in the marriage thing. I said, never in the history of the world was there a thing called same-sex marriage. It's a modern legal construct, is really what it is. But that legal construct would not even have been conceived if there wasn't government creating special rights for OMALs in the first place. And so that's really what's led us to where we are here today. That I say, on the right, you have a right to believe in OMAL, but you don't have a right to impose that on others. On the left, you have a right to believe in the imagination of same-sex marriage, but you don't have a right to impose that imagination on others. The reality is everyone has the right to think and freely believe of their own free conscience, but they don't have a right to impose that on others. And that's really why this is all about marriage control and not about marriage protection or marriage equality.
Yeah, I think this. I have a very strong belief that, for everyone that supported the LGBT community, I think you've got to, if you believe in that same fairness and that same freedom and that idea of getting away from government telling you what you can and can't do with your personal life, when your personal life is not affecting the rights of anybody else, you're not stepping on the toes of anyone else. I think if you supported the LGBT community, I can't, and look, I'm not here trying to promote anything. This is my personal belief. I don't see how you can't take the side of the polygamist position and say, well, freedom for all, and government control needs to be pulled away from marriage in general, including polygamy groups. I don't understand how you can argue any other way that it's fair for same sex but not fair for polygamy, and we're going to back away from government control over marriage, yet we're going to define it as something to limit other groups. So I definitely think that everyone that supported this idea of marriage equality has to consider supporting this argument as well. I don't see how you can be a true advocate for freedom, especially in the marriage realm, if you're not going to take that next step. That's just my personal feeling.
Absolutely, and that's why I use the soundbite that protects marriage equality is an Orwellian animal farm term of equality where some people are less equal than others. Do you believe in real equality, or do you believe in the Orwellian animal farm equality?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking the time on such short notice to be on the program today. I thought that this was a very important point to make, because while we are all very happy that the government has acknowledged the right for same-sex couples to marry and that government control has been pulled back, I want to see it pulled back completely, because the last thing I want is more big government telling me what I can and can't do with my personal life when it doesn't affect anyone else other than me and the people that are directly involved in my life who choose to be there. So I want to thank you. You're extremely, extremely knowledgeable about this topic. I want to encourage anyone who wants to support what Mark is doing to check out his website, nationalpolygamyadvocate.com. If you are a true believer in freedom, I can't see how you can't make that connection to marriage equality. So, Mark, thank you so much for being on. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, quite honestly, anyone that went out on Facebook and colored themselves rainbows, or went with the marriage equality emblem on your page, or whatever, quite honestly, if you don't support what Mark's doing, you're a hypocrite.
Yeah, absolutely right, Bob. I think so. Mark, thank you. I want to have you on again in the future, especially as we follow the Brown case and see where that ultimately gets us around 2017, because I think it's really, if you are a lover of the law, you're a lover of freedom and equality, and you want to see how this develops, this is a perfect time to watch something unfold the same way we did with the LGBT community. So, maybe in the future, we'll have you back on again. We'll do a show dedicated to this, and we'll talk about where we are maybe 6-7 months from now. Thank you again, Mark. I really appreciate it. And again, it's Mark Henkel, the National Polygamy Advocate. His website is nationalpolygamyadvocate.com. It was a pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye-bye.
So, totally fascinating conversation, Bob. And really, how do you, whether you like polygamy as something that you would choose to do or not, how can you argue the civil rights don't extend?
And that's, you start talking about slippery slopes and such like that. That's where, people want to take things, and the whole thing is he made a great point in the UCAP, about consenting adults. If that's what people want to do and they're not harming others, how can you not? I mean, again, a week ago, yeah, you could, because that was the law. And whether or not I agree with it or not, that's the law.
Right.
And that's why you fight laws, and that's why you go to court. And that's why there's you break laws to try to bring it to the top. But now that it has changed, how can you stop it?
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? I never would think of myself, maybe 10 years ago as somebody that believes that, polygamy is something that we should fight for. It's not for me at this point in my life about polygamy. I don't want to become a polygamist, but what I want to see is the same inequality that the LGBT community has fought for with the support of the non-LGBT community. I just don't like inequality. I don't like unfair treatment of one group. And I think that it's important, whether you are a supporter of polygamy in and of itself or just a supporter of freedom, that you look at this argument, and I think you at least owe it to yourself to take this argument on in your head and say, does this make any sense? Where are we going to stop?
That's funny. And he had brought up the point about the left versus the right. And I never really looked at it like that. Like, this is something that the right should have championed all along.
Yeah.
But the GOP's platform is so steeped in religion, and that is what it is. And everybody asks me, how can you be a Republican and you're not religious? Well, it's not why I think the way I think. I have bigger issues that I believe, to me. But the fact is that they are the party that says, yeah, less government. And well, less government should let you do what you want to do as long as you're not harming others.
Absolutely.
I'm usually, I like to put myself in a pretty good light of forensic arguing, and I can dig nothing up on this one, man.
No,
he's got it.
No, you like polygamy or not? You think that it's something that you wouldn't want to do or not? Forget that for a second.
Doesn't matter.
No, we're talking about a fundamental civil right. Government should not have the say in marriage. They've admitted that, yet they're going to say that you can't marry more than one spouse, more than one wife or consenting adult. Makes no sense to me. I think if you're going to have this argument and you're going to pass this, you've got to pass it all across the board.
Well, the slippery slope argument, like, oh, well, but you're opening up to it. They can marry children now. No, that's where government can get involved.
Yeah.
The protection of the people. That's where they're going to get involved. That's where they should get involved, because now you're outside of the realm of adults and people that make up their mind. And even if and that's where, in the same argument, you can't force government can't force you or shouldn't be able to force you to do one or the other, because they're not hurting anyone.
Yep.
There is no negative, direct negative fallout to somebody that wants to have 2 or 3 or 4, 17 lives. It doesn't matter.
Nope.
They're happy. Let them be happy. There's no crimes being committed. There's no victims of anything that would develop into anything worse as far as with child slavery or trafficking or whatever like that. And that's the biggest concern. So just and that's probably that lack of understanding and the perpetuation of the negative. You're going to have bad apples in every group, whether it's white people not liking black people, or black people not liking white people, or gay people not liking straight people, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have those bad apples.
Yep.
But you can't broad brush it, as much as everybody wants to. So, or I should say everybody, as much as certain people want to.
Yeah, here's my issue with this whole thing. I think that part of the problem for polygamous groups is the portrayal in the media of people in plural marriages. And I think that there is a heavy hand with the way they approach Christianity. Now, I happen to be a Christian. Okay. I'm an Orthodox Christian, Russian Orthodox, similar to Catholic. I have my set of beliefs with respect to Christianity, but when I see people like, and I'm going to go so far as to say the Duggars from 19 Kids and Counting, and I see some of these fundamentalist, far right, extremely ultra conservative Christian groups, what I think of is that's not the same religion that I believe in. That's not the same way that I want to act, but yet that's what gets ratings on television. So they'll put these people, they'll put a Jim Bob Duggar on the air who is his own pastor, who has his own church services in his house where he presides, and you've got to give side hugs, and you've got to wear long dresses, and the women seem to be somewhat oppressed because they're relegated to cooking and cleaning and quote-unquote traditional female jobs, while the men go out and do physical labor type jobs. That way of living, combined with the Christianity, makes Christian groups out to be freaks, and also takes people that are Christian and want to pursue polygamy, and that makes it even worse, because now you're crazy because you're a polygamist and you're a freak because you're a Christian. But really, it is the extreme that we see. It is not what Mark Henkel is talking about, is not going out and being able to marry 15-year-old girls. We're talking about consenting adults, not kids. And that's where I think a lot of the sensationalism with what we see on TV is brought in, because we like, what shows do we like to see? We like to see people who are put in bad situations. We like to point out extremism and, you know, what they do. I mean, that's that's why people tune in for ratings. You want to see a Real Housewife flip over a table, and then you want to see that same Real Housewife fall because her husband did something illegal. That's our culture. And I think that, you know, Mark and I had talked a year ago about this idea of Mormonism and how it differs from the polygamist, you know, because it's not based on religion, it's based on freedom. And so, you know, that's where I think that they do have a hurdle, because the perception of it, I mean, imagine years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, when would you see an LGBT commercial or a same-sex couple on a commercial selling yogurt? You wouldn't. Now,
oh God, no.
You know, you've got the Chobani commercial, and people accept it. Now, could you imagine?
Well, yeah.
Imagine,
and that's big business.
Go ahead.
Probably trying to get a market too, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's big business trying to make sure they get a market. I mean,
absolutely.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. You never would have seen that.
But imagine right now seeing a commercial for, you know, Disney World with a man and his 4 wives, right? There'd be outrage. People would stop going to Disney, right? Imagine that. But imagine 10, 15 years ago.
Disney's going to 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. counting by the C notes, how many people they just let into the park. But
that's anyway, right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
But you know, that's the point that I want to make, and I strongly believe in freedom and what this country was originally founded on. You know, what it really meant to be an American, and to have government, you know, for the people, etc., not government controlling the people. And the closer we get to government control, the more I think we suffer as a nation. And while what we've been talking about is government control over things that harm people, but, you know, you have to let the people decide what's harmful. You know, because can you say?
Well,
yeah. What were you gonna say?
Mm-hmm. I said, well, you know, you run up, you know, of the people, by the people, for the people, or for the people, of the people, by the people. Can't remember it verbatim, but you're supposed to have elected officials that are voting based on and legislating based on how they were put in there. You know, this guy's from a conservative area. It's going to give you a conservative vote. You can't put everything out to a referendum amongst the people. You have to let the process work. And the fact that DOMA existed was the process. The fact that DOMA got shot down was the process. Hey, you know, slavery is a perfect example. Prior to 1865-ish or 1861-ish, the slavery was okay. It was not a big deal. Everybody said it was okay. You know, the electorate said it was okay. The legislation said it was okay. But then came along the Emancipation Proclamation, said it wasn't okay. Supreme Court I'm not sure if there were any cases that had to uphold it, but the fact of the matter is, it's not okay. The world changes. The people change. And the Supreme Court is there to say, what you have done legislatively is not right.
Yep.
And that's where they step in. And this is where you can't tell one group of people. And that's the one statement I go back to find it, that Scalia had written, or Kennedy had written, or excuse me, Roberts had written about, we're governing of men, or are we governing by laws? And you'll govern by laws until the point where it comes to the point where men have to look at it and say, this law, although everyone agrees with it, it's not right. It flies in the face of what we say, not what we do. We say everybody's equal and everybody can enjoy themselves as long as they don't harm others, but you have said not. So we're going to overturn this. Yeah. And that's what they've done here. I mean, whether or not I agree with it or whether or not you agree with it, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. It's how should it be looked at in the eyes of the Constitution. And there's a lot of people that say, "Oh, well, this is against the Constitution." No, it's not.
Right.
This is not saying religious people have to do anything because they don't agree with same-sex marriage. It's not saying that one bit. It's just saying that you can't stop that. You can't not allow it.
Right.
And that's I get some heat from it from a couple of people that I discuss things with, and they say, "Oh, it's all in a handbasket. Oh, we're just giving in. We're just giving in." No, we're not. They're getting their fair shake.
Yeah, for me, it's about government control. And I don't want to live in the Soviet Union. I don't want to live where, back at the time of the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks come in and say, "That's it. We're eradicating Christianity because we don't believe in it.
Right.
We're going to burn down the churches. We're going to execute the Tsar. And we're going to take that idea of a religious nation of Russia and we're going to destroy it because we don't believe in it." I don't want that kind of control. I don't want to be told what I can't do. And I don't want somebody that doesn't know me telling me my limitations or what I shouldn't do when what I'm doing doesn't hurt other people. You want to regulate the car industry because there's too many chemical emissions coming from my car. You want to change that? Well, fine. Even though I like my car, you might have a point because you might be benefiting us as a worldwide community by protecting us against emissions. I get that. You want to tell me, and as much as I'm not for gun regulation, because I think, and at some point we'll have to discuss this on a show, I think that the vast majority of people that commit crimes with guns either have obtained them illegally, where gun control will have no effect, or they are improperly protected guns within a rightful gun owner's home. So you have access to a kid getting a gun that you have registered. I don't see how gun control affects those sort of things, but I would even entertain the argument that gun control might have some discussion that should be out there to protect people. So maybe there's a way of doing it. Maybe there's the RFID technology that could help protect people. All right, I get that because it does talk about protection of people, but and I'm not saying I agree with it. That's just, I would entertain that argument. But how could you entertain this argument where the government says you can't marry who you want to marry when it doesn't have any impact on anybody?
Right. If the government wanted to control marriage, they should have. If they didn't want to control marriage, they should have stayed out of it. And
exactly.
They didn't. There was a reason to control it, and it was for property rights or for wealth rights or whatever. There's a reason to control it. But the problem is they controlled it, in my estimation, and obviously in the SCOTUS's estimation, in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's move on from this. I think it was a great discussion. I think Mark was very knowledgeable. I really enjoy speaking with him because, again, whether you like what he's saying or not, take it from a fairness standpoint. You can't argue. So, but we've got a lot of other things to try to go through quickly. NASCAR, right? That's interesting.
Absolutely. NASCAR is they're always they're a leader. They are choosing to eliminate the Confederate flag presence at races. NASCAR taking further steps to distance itself from the Confederate flag. CEO and Chairman Brian France told the AP on Saturday. Calling it an offensive symbol, France said NASCAR would go as far as we can to eliminate the presence of that flag, which is associated with bigotry and racism and frequently used as a symbol by white supremacy groups. Obviously, we have our roots in the South. There are events in the South as part of our history, like it is for the country, France told the AP, but it needs to be just that, part of our history. It isn't part of our future. We want everybody in this country to be a NASCAR fan, and you can't do that by being insensitive in any one area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of divisive things going on right now.
Yeah.
And activists even cutting down flags. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's, again, this is that freedom and right argument that I mentioned with Mark. Is I have the freedom to buy and or display a flag that offends. But as the government which is supposed to be doling out rights, shouldn't be in a situation to show discrimination or shouldn't show favoritism to one or the other. And that's really, you start talking about governments and businesses, they can do what they want to do. It's about marketing for them.
Yep.
They're not going to lose a single race fan because of this.
Right.
I would expect.
Unfortunately, the reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard might have a problem, because if you remember the General Lee, you're going to see a bit of a problem there.
It's going to be a lot of, I may apply for some post-video work eliminating the flag from those videos. Yeah.
You know what?
I'm sure someone's considering it right now.
Yeah. You know what I'm interested in, and here's my point, that it's going to sound, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, you're going to think I'm saying something else, and I'm not. Here's the deal. I think of the Confederate flag not in a way that promotes hatred or bigotry. I think about it from a historical standpoint. When Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, yes, the South owned slaves, but so did some people in the North, and you can't overlook that.
Sure.
But my point is here that there was nothing illegal about the Confederacy. It was our country split apart, something historical that was so significant that brought us to where we are today. So I don't look at that and say offensive. Not in the context of history.
I think and you're smarter than I am, but I'm going to say that the Confederacy was illegal because the secession of the states was not a legal move.
But then I go back and say that the creation of the United States was illegal because we seceded from Great Britain. So
you're absolutely. I use this exact same argument as somebody.
we're a country.
Same thing. We are the original terrorists.
That's right.
And of course, and I got we're not doing this. No. You look up the word insurgent. I use the word insurgent. I said, you look up what an insurgent is. And an insurgent is against civil authority.
Yep.
And when we decided we were going to revolt against England, Great Britain was the civil authorities. And there were people that didn't, they were the liberator kissers. As I put it, I said, the Iraqis didn't like what we were doing as well, and said, "Oh, we were welcomed," and they were kissing us. Yeah, well, there were loyalists here too.
Yep.
That wanted Great Britain to stay in control. And you're absolutely right. I digress because I got away from. But yeah, the Confederacy was a union. It was an event, and I look at it in both ways depending on its use.
Well, I think now, look, if you go back though and you say historically Civil War time, this is what the Confederacy was. But then you go to the 1950s and 60s, and now the Confederate flag is different because of its adoption by white supremacy groups. So I can see why now you would not want to have a government building or entity flying the Confederate flag because of what it has meant by the adoption of white supremacy groups. And I'm going to go so far as to say this, and here's where people I think are going to go crazy. The swastika was originally a Norse and Germanic tribal runic symbol. And if you had the Vikings still alive today, wouldn't the Vikings be saying, wait a minute, that swastika on the Nazi flag does not mean what you think it means. It means unlimited power in our runic symbolism. But there
might be some people in Minnesota, some old Norsemen.
Yeah, but we look at it now and we don't see the Norse symbol, the historic Norse symbolism behind the swastika. Sure. What do we see? 1940s, we see Hitler, we see white supremacy. So now obviously the Nazi flag is something that you never see, you don't fly, and when you do see it, you cringe, and there's a lot of fear that it produces. I think that
sure.
If you look at it though, I mean, you're taking something historical, somebody is adopting it, morphing it, and making it serve a criminal, offensive, violent purpose. But the same is true with the Confederate flag after the 1960s, after the Ku Klux Klan, after white supremacists, because every white supremacist group has the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag. So I don't think it's easy to say Confederate flag is bigotry. That's what it means. No, Confederate flag meant a group of people that didn't like what they were being told. It started the Civil War. That's what it means.
You're exactly great. That was my next point in the fact that the Confederacy was more about liberties than anyone, because here you had the federal government telling states what to do. And it's in its use. We'll use the Dukes of Hazzard, for example. Was the Dukes of Hazzard a racist show? Did it promote racist values? Did it have anything to do with the negative connotation of the flag? Absolutely not.
Right.
Generally, those two were the guys helping. If there was, and I mean if, because I don't remember if there ever was, if there was anyone black on the Dukes of Hazzard, he was being oppressed by Boss Hogg. Yeah. And therefore, Bo and Luke Duke and Uncle Jesse, and of course, the Daisy Duke gal. I think her name was Daisy.
It was Daisy.
As a matter of fact. Go figure. They were, if anything, they were trying to help the person being oppressed, regardless of race, creed, color, national origin, possibly sexual orientation, and or identity. So in that point, it was more about a libertarian thing, and that's why I don't think it's going to be, I would hope that the Dukes of Hazzard generally, it's being attacked though. People, they're saying they're removing them from the cars, and I think that's wrong. Because I understand the thought process behind it, but it stops for me when you get to the point of what they had that flag displayed for, versus the fact that I've got in northern Michigan, Joe Dirt driving around with his pickup truck and his gun rack and his Confederate flag rear window sticker. I have a pretty good idea of what Joe Dirt's trying to say.
Yeah.
And I'm prejudicial in that respect. I absolutely profile. You're right. So I think it's in its use, and that's what gets lost in a lot of this.
I do think, though, just to kind of to wrap up my thoughts so that people sort of understand what I'm saying, I don't agree that the Confederate flag, but I don't even want to call it the Confederate flag because it's not the Confederate flag. It's now, in my opinion, the flag adopted by the Klan and other white supremacy groups. That does not have any purpose being on any government building at all, ever. Right. And I don't see how anyone can oppose that. So I applaud the fact that this is now being brought to the forefront and they're going to be removing it. That's good. I also applaud the fact that NASCAR is an Amazon, for example, who's no longer selling Confederate flags. They've acknowledged that the Confederate flag in today's modern world relates back to the 1960s, but I think it's important to for Americans to remember all of the men and women that died fighting under the Confederate flag who were not racists or bigots. They were looking for freedom. It's what shaped our country. Without the Civil War, there would be no civil rights movement. There would be no Martin Luther King. It was the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln that brought this to the forefront. So historically speaking, you could, and again, African-American groups might think that I'm being facetious, but I'm not. If you were an African-American, you could even say, in a sense, that the Confederate flag was a symbol of freedom because that's what really helped develop the civil rights movement. I know that's a stretch, but you can see where that relationship is. So
sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it's and people kind of lose that, and I agree. It doesn't belong on businesses. On government buildings. I think if a business decides to sell it or not sell it, is up to the business. That's you start. I mean, it's this side of throwing books in a fire when everyone decides to eliminate. There's some thought speech there, and you have to be careful. But I know the people that will continue to sell them will make money.
Yeah. Yep.
We'll make a lot of money.
I think this, though. I think that you cannot discriminate against anybody. Having the Confederate flag with its current meaning, I think, discriminates against people. I think it's unfair. I think it should be removed. So I applaud where that's going. I don't applaud, however, taking it in your own hands to go cut down a flag anywhere. What do you think about that?
No, well, that's the civil disobedience side of revolt, I suppose. I don't think it's not a good idea, but I understand it. A woman climbing to the top of a flagpole and then cutting down the Confederate flag in front of the South Carolina State House Saturday was promptly arrested and has got to see the banner raised again less than an hour later. Bree Newsom dressed in climbing gear, spoke respectfully with police gathered at the base of the flagpole as she continued to move even closer to the flag. Flag was to be kept in a box when it was removed without defacing it, while the funerals for the 9 people killed by an alleged white supremacist at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina on June 17th continued this weekend. Now, state officials or state police officers confiscated the flag immediately, and state house maintenance workers had it back up before 8 o'clock in the morning because that is still the law, right or wrong.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, and the Park Service has pulled the stars and bars from shops as well. In their gift shops and bookstores at national parks, according to the NPS on last Thursday. So they're pulling items in part because of the murders of the 9 churchgoers. But all sales items in parks are evaluated based on an educational value and their connection to the park. National Park Service Director Jonathan Jarvis said on Thursday, any standalone depiction of Confederate flags have no place in park stores. And I think that's a bad idea. Alabama Governor Robert Bentley ordered the Confederate flag taken down from their state house on Wednesday. South Carolina legislatures considering. Governors of Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland suggested their states should remove Confederate flags from license plates, though uncertain of when that's going to happen. And then members of the Mississippi legislature is talking about removing the stars and bars from their state flag. Now, this opens up a lot bigger discussion. Kentucky Senate President Robert Stivers said the statue of Jefferson Davis should be removed from his state's Capitol Rotunda, a suggestion endorsed by U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell as well. How far do we go on this thing? I don't think that now it's getting a little crazy.
Yeah. I think that, what it's so important for me, Bob, is that you've got to look at the difference between, and I understand everything that's happened in the past is historical, but I think that the difference between the Civil War and the difference between the Ku Klux Klan is significant. And I don't see how you can go into something like Gettysburg National Cemetery, where they have a really nice, extensive gift shop. What the hell do you think you're going to find in that store but books about the Union, books about the Confederacy? You're going to see that flag. So I don't know how far you go, because where does it stop?
Right, exactly. And people are saying the same thing about the Jefferson Memorial. Well, Jefferson owned slaves. Oh, Washington owned slaves. And what about the Washington Monument? Say, hey, you got to back up here. In the same token, Jefferson Davis, Stonewall Jackson, all these guys were secessionists. All these guys were pro-slavery. They were all the evil things that the empire was beyond the Death Star. But the fact of the matter is what they were doing at the time was lawful.
Yeah, that was nice. I really like that.
Thank you. My next trick. They were performing legal activities at the time.
Yep.
You can't, just because they weren't doing something illegal. I'll use an example here in a second. Jefferson Davis, still a really great man in the history of our country and in the South. He was the leader. He was the president. Robert E. Lee damn near beat us.
Yeah.
Here you got a lot of great generals, great military strategists that are still great people. Did they have a negative side to them? At the time, no, they didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, sure. I'm not talking about celebrating an individual maybe that sold millions and millions of albums and was proclaimed a humanitarian, yet seemed to have a penchant for little boys.
Right.
I'm not talking about putting a statue of that individual up.
Right.
We know we have a pretty good idea what he did. Not to mention being a drug abuser. But these are people that did things that were legal at the time, and they were still great people, and they're still important to the heritage of that particular area. And it's very important to the history, and it's very important that we learn what they did wrong, or incorrect. And that's where, you know, I mean, people are getting the slippery slope is starting to get a little crazy when they start talking about taking down statues of people that were absolutely great people in their time. And so, and people may disagree with me, but that's too bad. You can disagree with them all you want.
Yeah. And, you know, for that time, you're absolutely right. Because if you go back to, again, this analogy we've been using about the colonists, there was nobody who was more of a terrorist than Sam Adams. And, you know, aside from a beer maker, he was a terrorist. And this idea that, you know, we'll have a picture of Ben Franklin, we'll have a statue of Sam Adams, and that's okay because it resulted in our freedom here. But, you know, isn't it the same thing? These guys, they broke the law, they killed people, they terrorized people, and we celebrate them because it's the birth of our nation.
Yes.
I'm completely against slavery. I think it was abhorrent. But at the time that the people in the South had slaves, that the time George Washington had slaves, they didn't know any better, is my point. They didn't know any better. And you cannot play Monday morning quarterback and go back and say these people were bad, because if you say that, then everybody that came before us is bad, because everybody has made mistakes. Isn't the point of history to learn from our mistakes?
Yes, it's supposed to be. They are our own Maqtada El Sadr.
Yeah, yes.
You do know who Maqtada El Sadr is, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I thought that was lost for a second. It's the delay. But yeah, I mean, they were everything that was bad to the power.
Yep.
And that's what, it doesn't make them any less of, you know, they were, had the South won, maybe the Washington Monument may not have been erected, stuck around. Maybe the Jefferson Memorial might not have stuck around. You know, maybe they, as the ruling party, would have come through and said, you're taking these things down because they're not what our country now believes.
Yeah.
Sure. But, you know, that's, to the victor goes the spoils, I suppose.
Yep. You know, one thing that before we go ahead. No, you go.
Well, I was gonna head up to the we were talking about government control earlier in the California vaccine bill.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we're probably not going to be able to hit everything that we wanted to today, but I think that the California vaccine bill is something we should talk about for a second. So I'll let you take that over for a minute.
Yeah. No, we're talking about personal responsibility and personal rights, and here you go, California vaccine bill banning personal and or religious exemptions. It's moving forward. The California House passed a proposal that would outlaw a family's personal and religious beliefs as reasons to exempt their children from school vaccinations. Controversial proposal now returns to the Senate, which must approve amendments for the so-called SB 277 to advance to Governor Jerry Brown's desk for his signature. Senate passed the initial bill in May. The measure, arising partly from concerns over this year's measles outbreak linked to Disneyland, would allow medical exemptions deemed appropriate by the State Department of Public Health, according to a legislative summary. Opponents include Californians for Vaccine Choice, whose website asserts the law would eliminate a parent's right, let's keep that word in mind, to exempt their children from one, small, or all vaccines, a risk-laden medical procedure. If SB 277 is approved by the Assembly and Governor Brown signs it, California parents will be forced to give their children more than 40 doses of 10 federally recommended vaccines or homeschool, unless they can find a doctor who will write a medical exemption that doctors deny to 99.99% of children under federal guidelines, the group is saying. Well, California Senator Richard Pan, a pediatrician who co-introduced the proposal, said the measure would close a vaccination exemption loophole and has received broad bipartisan support, including from schools, of course. Years of anti-science, anti-vaccine misinformation have taken its toll on immunization rates to the point that the public is now in danger, Pan said in a statement this month. Children, pregnant women, seniors, and people with cancer, organ transplants, and other conditions are counting on us to make sure science prevails. Under the proposal, if a parent chooses to not vaccinate their child, the parent would have to homeschool their child, participate in a multifamily private home school, or use public school independent study programs that's administered by local education agencies, according to PAN and co-sponsor Ben Allen, former president of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. The two legislators said California would join 32 other states that do not allow parents to opt out of vaccination requirements using a personal belief exemption. From January until May 29th, 173 people in 21 states and the District of Columbia developed measles. 117 of those cases were linked to Disneyland in Orange County, according to the CDC and Prevention. The current rate of vaccination in too many of California's schools is below the level needed for herd immunity. I always like talking about people in herds. The critical percentage needed, that makes me feel a lot better. The critical percentage needed to prevent small outbreaks from spreading and becoming epidemics, according to Vaccine California's website. Now, here's that freedom right argument again.
Yeah.
You may have the freedom and you may have the right, but that right does not supersede the government's responsibility to protect the people physically. How do you feel about this, Peter?
You know, this one's really hard for me. Last year we had Sue Collins on, who was I believe she was the president or the chairperson for a group in New Jersey who is promoting the freedom of choice for parents with vaccinations. And you've got people like Kirstie Alley, who obviously is a big proponent of not having mandated vaccinations. Here's my thing. I'm confused. I don't know. And you know why I don't know? Because I can't say that I trust everything the government tells me to do. If you remember back when the swine flu was big and there was this whole panic. I mean, it had to be like, 2002, 3, 4 years ago. But this idea of like, all right, now we've got to introduce this new vaccine that's going to prevent against the swine flu. I was afraid. I don't want to be the guinea pig for something that the CDC has created because I don't know that I trust them. And isn't that a shame that I, an American citizen, don't trust everything that the government says or does? But I would venture to say that 90% of the people in this country don't just lay back and accept what the government's telling you. On the other hand, as a parent, right, I want my kids to be healthy, but what do you do? Because the proponents of freedom of choice say that most kids who are not vaccinated don't get sick, and they've got all these statistics, and they talk about, not spreading. So there's a part of me that says, wait a minute, we should be vaccinated because there are diseases that we can eradicate. We can eradicate smallpox. We can eliminate some of these diseases. So yeah, I want to be vaccinated. I get the flu shot every year, but at the same time, there's this little piece of me that says, how do I know that the government is right or that this product is right?
Sure.
What do you think?
There's that rush to market to make sure everybody. There's that rush to market that makes everyone think that shouldn't be trusted. Do I really think that Park Davis has been sitting on a swine flu vaccine for 20, 30, 40 years, not using it, and then all of a sudden, hey, oh, by the way, we have something that's tried and true. No, this is something they just figured out, so they don't know the benefits or the downfall of it. Watch the commercials. Side effects may include blah 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 blah, including death. Thalidomide was a good idea for a while too. Look what happened there. And so you absolutely have that right to make the choice not to vaccinate your child based on the government's recommendation. But they also have a larger right to protect everyone, not just you. And so I think this is right in line with, if I don't like the way the school's handling my kids, then I pull them out and I do something else with them. That's my right. But it's not my right to send my infected child into that school.
Yep. Yeah, I think that the out is, if you don't want to have your child vaccinated, homeschool. That's the out that they're giving you in California.
Yeah, you have a choice. You have a choice. Yeah. And so, and that's fine. Yeah. It would take, me personally, it would take quite a bit for me to make that decision, to say, hey, you know what? I don't trust what you folks are doing. Count me out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Color me at home this time, guys. Yeah.
You know what? There's so much out there in conspiracy theory land where even a rational, reasonable person could listen to somebody like
sure,
Alex Jones, for example, and
yeah.
think, that along with your vaccination for the flu, you're also getting a tracking code injected into you so that they know where you are all the time. And you know who Alex
we
Jones
sell
is,
these
right?
great tinfoil hats that you can pick up. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
The
InfoWars feller.
That's right. And you know what? you read that stuff, and I'll tell you, you can get sucked into it, but he's making money doing that. That's his career. That's his job. So, I don't know. I love watching those alien shows like In Search of Aliens and Ancient Aliens on history.
Sure.
I love them. But you know what? I might look at them from an entertainment value, and I might certainly question certain things like, these crop formations or the Nazca lines or the stones in Pumapunku. And I might say, wow, how did that happen? But I'm not going to now say, all right, I was created by an alien race and then, change my whole belief system. So I think that, you can be sort of turned on to that way of thinking, but you can't buy into something like that, because do we really want to make that call and say the CDC is using us as guinea pigs? No. But then you've got that other hand, still another position where you say, yeah, but wait a minute, what about during the development of the atomic bomb and then the tests where they put soldiers at risk of radiation poisoning? How do you deal?
No, absolutely, yeah.
That's why I say at the beginning of this,
we had,
I'm confused. I don't know what to believe.
Oh, we got the anthrax vaccine when I went to the Gulf the first time around, untested. Oh, by the way, we think this will work. Put it in your veins. Right. Now, were you afraid when that was mandated, or did you have more of a fear against anthrax? Yeah, but from the fact that I landed when I hit the ground in Saudi Arabia, we literally got off the plane under Scud attack. As I'm running across the hangar, well, not even that far. When I got down from the flight deck down to the cargo deck on the C-5A, all you could hear were air raid sirens, and this guy says, "Put on your mask and get off my plane." And so we masked up and started running for the hangar and watched the Scud shoot down, or Patriot missile shoot down a Scud pretty close to Dhahran International. And so based on that situation, I was pretty happy to have the vaccine. Right. You don't know what was in those, and then come to find out we were exposed anyway from one of the ammo dumps. Our chemical alarms were going off, and we're like, well, that's odd. The war's kind of over. Why are our chemical alarms going off? It's because of the wind and the destruction of those non-chemical weapons that they were destroying over in the ammo dump miles away. So, yeah. Yeah, so now I've been exposed to sarin. Thanks. Nice. Nice. But I'm sure at such low levels, it probably won't affect me at all. It's just sorry if there's anyone afflicted. I'm making fun of it. I have to. It's how I cope. It's scary though. It really is when you think about it, right? I mean, I can't make that call. I don't know, and so I have one option, and two options. Either I distrust the government and I live in fear, or I trust that maybe there is something to it, and I say, well, look, there are certain things that my wife and I definitely have talked about, and some of these vaccinations, there's like, I can't remember the name of it. Is it HPC or HPV, where they want kids as young as like 10 years old to get this sex vaccination thing. And obviously it's not a sex vaccination, but you know what I'm talking about.
maybe I say to myself,
right. I have 2 girls. Yeah.
right, I don't know that I want to do that. I've got old boys. I don't know that I want to do that. Is it something they need? Is it something I have to be worried about? So, that to me, it's like, all right, I really don't want to hear that. I don't want the drug companies pushing that on me. But the flu vaccine, we all get our flu vaccine every year. I don't feel like I'm being tracked. I mean, I don't know, but I don't feel like I'm being tracked. But what am I going to do? Am I going to live in fear? Am I going to build a bunker? No way. I don't have enough money to build a bunker. I'm just going to take my vaccination. All my kids were vaccinated. And, you have to have faith somewhere in people. And that's just my take on it. I don't know. Because you know what? If I
you've gotta.
Yeah, if I didn't get my kids vaccinated and then they developed some disease, I'd forever blame myself. So I don't know. I know the studies out there that say autism and vaccinations have a connection, but there's an equal number of studies out there that say that there is no connection. I just don't know. But, years ago when I was in my early 20s, I started to believe a lot of these conspiracy things because it was so overwhelming. But, it got to the point where, like, that's all you could think about. And you thought you distrusted everyone. And you can't live your life like that. So I've chosen to mellow out.
Yeah, no, it's you have to. You'll go crazy if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So there you go. Do what makes sense. Do some research, and in God we trust.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yep. All right. Well, what do you want to do?
That wraps it up, man.
I think that's it, right? I mean, what time? We got 11:31. Yeah, so I think that's going to do it.
It's 11:30. Right on the dot.
Yep. Look, I think today.
Great having Mark on today.
Yeah, totally great. I think it was a really good discussion. I really think that from, even just an intellectual standpoint, that's a point you've got to consider. I think it's a great argument, something that challenges our thought, and that's really what we're talking about here. You want to challenge yourself and challenge the government and challenge the laws, and always look to see if a law that's been put in place is still effective or still does the same thing. 30, 40, 50 years from now, when there's no skateboards, there's hoverboards. Do we still need to have a skateboard law, for example? By the way, I saw this. I can't remember who it was. I think it was maybe Lexus put up this promo video where they've created a hoverboard like in Back to the Future. So that's where that came from. But so
at least this is reference for it. Good.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm coming out of Star Wars, so I can't say much.
Hey, look, I happen to be a big Star Wars fan, so you can't talk to me. But you know what? Look, I think yeah. Oh, you're a Star Wars fan too?
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice.
I have all 6.
So you're waiting for December to roll around, right?
Eagerly.
Yep. I can't wait.
Eagerly yet cautiously.
Yeah.
It's in Disney's hands now, and I'm not a little concerned about that.
Well, it's got to be better than the prequels. It's got to be better. I mean, Han Solo, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing is how the milk is trying to be forced from the teat on this whole machine, and that's what scares me.
Yeah, I know.
So we didn't go dig up Alec McGinnis and try to virtually bring him back to life. Only to have him be afraid of fire. If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited, but I'm cautious.
Cautiously excited. You know what's funny about Alec Guinness? As long as we just mentioned him, that guy, right, hated Star Wars, and he hated being Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, he did.
Hated it. He thought it was
But he was the smartest actor.
Yeah. Well, he was the only actor.
Took the points. He took the points.
Yep. He was the only actor at that time, aside from Peter Cushing, who was Grand Moff Tarkin in episode 4, to be anything, really.
Yeah.
Everybody else was sort of
right.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right.
You had Harrison Ford, who was in American Graffiti, I think. But but you know what?
And Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. At the same time, though, when you've got Alec Guinness making this character. By the time Return of the Jedi came around in 83, he knew what a massive success machine Star Wars was. You would have thought that he would have at least, for the show of it all, talked about how wonderful it was. Mm-hmm. But every time he was interviewed, he hated it. He didn't want to talk about Star Wars. And it made me, not like the aged Obi-Wan Kenobi. I have to say that I like the Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan Kenobi because he was a little more gentle and appreciative of being in Star Wars.
Well, you look at Robert Reed hated the Brady Bunch, his most successful venture. Gordon Lightfoot hates because Edmund Fitzgerald was just a filler song. It was never supposed to be a hit.
And it's the only song that anybody knows by Gordon Lightfoot.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's what he hates about it, yeah. So now that we've descended into Nerd Town.
Yeah. I think we should leave. Yeah, we're setting ourselves up for disaster here.
Very much so. These guys are horrible.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to let you go so you can start
this week.
Yeah, redesigning the General Lee. Good. But all right, that's going to do it for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully this was as educational and fun for you as it was for me and Bob. I also want to thank everybody out there who has followed us on Twitter. Last week was a huge week. Meerkat was a wonderful thing. And I thank all the people out there who follow us on Meerkat. Make sure you check out the new UTLRadio.com, completely brand new redesigned site. We got a lot of things going on that we're working on to make it even better, because the whole premise behind Understanding the Law Radio is to give you information, tools. It's to teach you how to think about the laws, think about business, and then to take that next practical step and to actually do things for yourself, understand how you can use the law to help you, how you can create your own legal documents, how you can represent yourself in certain situations. UTL Radio, Understanding the Law Radio, is about that freedom that we talk about on the show when we go through the news stories. We want to give you that freedom to decide what's wrong, what's right, and that freedom to take care of yourself, both from a business standpoint and a legal standpoint, because I'm tired of lawyers out there keeping the law a secret, keeping the procedure a secret. I am that masked magician on Fox, right, Bob? That's who I am. We are going to break through some of those secrets, and lawyers might not like it, but I want to see people out there help themselves and learn, and that's what we're about here. And that's every show that we have is aimed at making people think for themselves and be better. Whether we're talking about, a musician and how he has made it through in an art field, because really that's what it is. He's transitioned through the trenches of business, and he or she managed to maintain his artistic abilities and composure. Or if we're doing a legal Q&A, business or legal Q&A, and we're answering a direct question, that you now have that knowledge about how to handle that situation. Or if we're interviewing somebody on the Understanding Business show, and we're talking about what they did and how we can learn from them. That's what the whole purpose of this station is. That's where we're moving. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, and make sure you write in and you let us know what you think about Bob's fascination with Star Wars. I have it too. I'm just trying to throw Bob under the bus. But, seriously, I think that we want your involvement, because that's when this show shines. That's when we get, really involved in what we're doing. And we both love this. So we want to hear your feedback. I appreciate everybody out there that has written in. I was yesterday at a photo expo picking up some new gear and talking to people out there about what we're doing here on the station, and they were in love with it. So I want to thank everybody, and this station's going to grow. This website's going to grow. We're going to develop, and it's going to be very exciting. So I'm looking forward to the next 6 months to see where we go. That's going to do it. Tomorrow, we're going to have live legal and Q&A on. And then Wednesday, we have an issue. We're going to have to look at maybe rescheduling our first episode of Understanding, or no, it's actually on a different note, where we're going to have Nate Mangard on. We're going to have to see if we can juggle things around because there's an issue with Wednesday's show. But more on that later. We'll figure it out and we'll post it up on the website. And, you know, Bob, I think what we should consider is doing a show maybe next Monday for the week in review and doing a special episode. And I want to run this by you. I might as well do it in front of everybody. Why not? I think that we should focus. You do recall the email I sent you last week, right?
That's
right. So not next Monday, but a Monday. Yeah. I think we should do
the following Monday.
Yeah, the following Monday, exactly, which will be up on the website. But yeah, I think that we should do a show that focuses on summer vacation. And as fun as it sounds, I want to talk about liability.
Oh, yeah.
And I just read an article in USA Today about most people putting their vacations on credit cards, and that has a big influence and impact on debt in the future. And then you come off of your summer vacation into the holiday season with more debt. So, you know, maybe we'll put together a show and schedule that, not next Monday, and do something dedicated to summer vacations. What do you think about that, Bob?
So I think it's a great idea because I don't think enough people don't think about that. Plus, when you go to state places, you know, what kind of, liability you put on yourself.
Yeah.
Not only everybody has a degree of indemnification, but there's, I went canoeing this weekend, and it was about a week ago where that river had to be shut down voluntarily because of the water levels, because of the amount of rain we've had in Michigan. And so those owners are making the call on their own, saying, you know what, it's too dangerous for people to be out there in this water.
Yeah.
And so, you know, where does their line stop and where does yours begin?
Yep. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. I think it's a good time, beginning of July, and we'll address that. So great. That's going to do it for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in, for downloading, for subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow. Bob and I will be back soon because Bob's not going to be here with us next week. But we're going to address that on the website. So that's going to do it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Tune in tomorrow. See you later. And remember, Bob, what are we going to remember? That there's power in understanding the law.
Understanding the law.